He worked the night shift at the Marine base cafeteria, always alone, always quiet. While others complained about the early hours and thankless work, he just tied his apron, pulled on his worn baseball cap, and got to cooking. The Marines called him Eddie, though no one knew if that was his real name. He'd been there 3 years, maybe 4. Time blurred when you worked in the shadows. Welcome to True Veteran Stories. Before we continue, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who were never meant to be forgotten. Eddie started every shift at 200 hours, 2 hours before anyone else arrived. He'd fire up the industrial grills, prep vegetables with mechanical precision, and have coffee brewing before the first hungry Marines stumbled through the doors. His movements were efficient, calculated, never wasted motion, never unnecessary steps. Nobody questioned why a civilian contractor would show up so early, work so methodically, or maintain such impossible standards for a base cafeteria. They just accepted that Eddie was different, reliable, precise in ways that made no sense for someone flipping eggs and serving hash browns. The base was Camp Lejeune adjacent, a smaller installation that housed training units and support personnel, the kind of place where careers were built slowly and quietly, where young Marines learned their trade before shipping out to bigger bases, bigger missions. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary, like Eddie himself. He lived alone in a small apartment off base, drove a beat-up Ford pickup that never broke down, and had no social media presence that anyone could find. The HR department had his emergency contact listed as none, his next of kin as NA. It was as if Eddie had appeared fully formed 3 years ago, with perfect references and no past worth mentioning. The younger Marines barely noticed him. They were too focused on chow, too busy complaining about training, too wrapped up in their own struggles to pay attention to the man who fed them. But the older staff, the seasoned NCOs and career Marines, they noticed things. Strange thing. The way Eddie held his knife, not like a cook, but like someone who'd used blades for more than cutting vegetables. The way he positioned himself in the kitchen, always with his back to a wall, always watching the entrances. The way he moved during the dinner rush, flowing between stations like he was navigating hostile territory. His food was too good for a base cafeteria. Not fancy, not elaborate, but prepared with a level of care and skill that belonged in a high-end restaurant. Vegetables cut to precise dimensions, meat seasoned with combinations that shouldn't have worked but always did. Even the simplest meals, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, emerged from his kitchen elevated somehow, transformed by attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. He never spoke unless spoken to. When Marines asked for seconds, he'd nod and load their plates without a word. When supply trucks arrived, he'd sign for deliveries with a signature so precise it looked military. But it was his hands that told the real story, if anyone cared to look. Sergeant Martinez was the first to notice. She'd been in the Corps for 12 years, served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and had an eye for details that kept people alive. One morning, she was early for chow duty and found Eddie prepping breakfast. His sleeves were rolled up, and in the harsh fluorescent light, she saw them, scars crisscrossing his forearms like a roadmap of violence. They weren't kitchen burns or accidents. These were deliberate, precise. Some were from blades, others looked like shrapnel. And on his right hand, between his thumb and forefinger, was a small scar in the shape of a crescent, the kind you get when someone tries to take a knife away from you and you refuse to let go. But it wasn't just the scars that caught her attention. It was the way Eddie moved when he thought no one was watching, the way he tested the weight of every knife before using it, the way he kept count of everyone entering and leaving the kitchen, the way his eyes would scan and catalog every person, every position, every potential threat. Martinez had seen that behavior before, in operators, in men who'd spent so much time in hostile territory that situational awareness had become as automatic as breathing. Men who'd learned to treat every environment as potentially dangerous because in their world, the moment you stopped being vigilant was the moment you died. She started paying closer attention. Eddie's schedule never varied, 0200 to 1400, Monday through Friday. But on weekends, when the base was quieter, she'd sometimes see his truck in the parking lot at odd hours, late at night, early morning, as if he couldn't stay away, couldn't break the routine that had become his anchor. Martinez didn't say anything that day, but she started watching. Eddie's routine never changed. In and at 200, coffee ready by 400, breakfast service until 0800, then prep for lunch. He cleaned as he cooked, maintaining his station with a discipline that went beyond food service requirements. Every knife had its place. every surface sanitized, every task completed to a standard that seemed almost military. The base commander, Colonel Reynolds, ate in the enlisted mess once a month, a tradition he'd maintained for 20 years. Most cooks would be nervous, triple-checking everything, trying to impress. Not Eddie. He prepared the colonel's plate the same way he prepared everyone else's. Precise portions, proper temperature, no fuss. But Reynolds noticed something others missed. Eddie's posture when authority entered the room. Not subservient, not nervous, alert. The way a soldier stands when brass walks by. The way someone trained to respect rank carries themselves, even in civilian clothes. After finishing his meal, Reynolds approached the serving line. "Good chow," he said simply. Eddie looked up from wiping down the counter. "Thank you, sir." Sir, not colonel or yes, sir, or any of the responses Reynolds expected from a civilian contractor. Just sir, delivered with the kind of respect that came from somewhere deeper than a job manual. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in October. The base was hosting a joint training exercise, which meant double the normal crowd for lunch. Eddie was working alone. His usual assistant had called in sick, when 3 busloads of visiting Marines arrived an hour early. The kitchen erupted into controlled chaos. Orders flying, Marines getting restless, the serving line backing up. Eddie moved through it like a machine, plating meals faster than seemed humanly possible. But even he couldn't keep up with the demand. Staff Sergeant Williams, the senior NCO supervising the exercise, stepped into the kitchen to assess the situation. He was about to call in additional personnel when he stopped dead in his tracks. Eddie wasn't just cooking, he was orchestrating, calling out orders to servers who weren't there, coordinating movements like a field commander managing a complex operation. "Behind you, 2 plates, move left." Eddie would call out to empty air, then pivot and slide 2 perfectly prepared plates across the counter, exactly where a server would have been standing if there had been one. He was cooking for ghosts, following protocols burned into his muscle memory from operations that had required feeding teams in hostile environments with limited resources and zero margin for error. Williams had spent 15 years in the Corps, including 3 deployments with Special Operations Unit. He recognized what he was seeing. This wasn't a cook overwhelmed by a lunch rush. This was an operator running a tactical feeding operation. That's when Lance Corporal Jackson made a mistake that nearly cost him his career. Hungry and impatient, he vaulted over the serving counter and grabbed a tray himself, ignoring protocol and food safety regulations. The moment Jackson's boots hit the kitchen floor, Eddie's entire demeanor changed. The transformation was instant and terrifying. His casual movements became predatory, his scanning became targeting, and suddenly Williams understood that they weren't watching a cook anymore. They were watching someone whose body remembered how to kill. Without raising his voice or making a scene, Eddie stepped between Jackson and the food line. His stance shifted, feet planted, hands ready, every muscle suddenly coiled like a spring. "Marine," Eddie said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made Jackson freeze mid-step. "You don't belong in my kitchen." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even an order. It was a statement of fact delivered with such calm certainty that Jackson immediately stepped back, apologized, and returned to the serving line without another word. Williams watched the entire exchange with growing recognition. He'd seen that tone before, that unmistakable command presence that came from men who'd led troops in combat, men who'd made life-and-death decisions in split seconds and learned to project authority that couldn't be questioned or challenged. Sergeant Martinez witnessed the whole thing. She saw how Eddie moved, how he controlled the situation without aggression or confrontation. More importantly, she saw something in his eyes during those few seconds, a hardness that spoke of experience far beyond food service. That evening, she stayed late and approached Eddie as he cleaned his station. "You weren't always a cook, were you?" Eddie continued scrubbing the grill, not looking up. "I was in Hellmand," Martinez continued. "Forward Operating Base Chapman. We had a guy come through there once. Military advisor, they said. Special operations. Never told us his name, never wore a uniform, but he had hands like yours." Eddie's scrubbing slowed but didn't stop. "He cooked for us sometimes," Martinez went on. "Said it reminded him of better times. Had the same way of holding a knife you do. Same scars." Finally, Eddie looked up. His eyes were tired, older than his face suggested. "Chapman, you said?" "Yes," Eddie nodded slowly. "Rough place. Good Marines there, though. They deserved better than MREs." It wasn't a confession, but it was confirmation enough. Word spread quietly through the NCO ranks. Not gossip, not speculation, just a shared understanding that the man cooking their meals had stories he'd never tell. stories from places that didn't exist on official maps, involving operations that never happened. The change wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. Marines started arriving for chow with better posture, cleaner uniforms. The chatter in the mess hall became more respectful, more disciplined. It was as if Eddie's presence had raised the standard simply by existing. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who'd served with Force Recon, started eating breakfast at the base instead of grabbing coffee at the local shop. He'd sit alone at a corner table, nursing his coffee and watching Eddie work. He never approached, never tried to engage in conversation, but his presence sent a message to the younger Marines. This man deserves respect. The respect was immediate and unspoken. Marines started saying, "Thank you," when they received their meals. The chow line became more orderly, quieter. Even the rowdiest recruits seemed to sense that something had changed. One morning, Rodriguez noticed something that confirmed his suspicions. Eddie was cleaning his knives after breakfast service, and his movements were ritualistic, ceremonial. Each blade was cleaned, inspected, and placed with precision that went beyond sanitation requirements. It was the behavior of someone who depended on his tools to stay alive, someone who'd learned that proper maintenance meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Rodriguez approached the serving window. "Good chow," he said simply. Eddie looked up, made eye contact for perhaps the first time since he'd started working there. "Thank you, Gunny." Gunny, not sir, not sergeant, Gunny, the informal term of respect used by Marines who'd earned the right to speak as equals. Rodriguez nodded once and walked away, but the message had been received by every Marine within earshot. Colonel Reynolds began eating in the enlisted mess more frequently, not to investigate, not to interrogate, but simply to be present. One evening, as Eddie cleaned the last serving tray, Reynolds approached him. "Son," the colonel said quietly, "I don't know what you did before you came here, and I don't need to know. But I want you to understand something. This base is better because you're here. These Marines are better fed, and that matters." Eddie looked up from his cleaning. "It's just chow, sir." "No," Reynolds replied. "It's not. It's taking care of people, and you've been doing that longer than you've been cooking, haven't you?" Eddie didn't answer, but he didn't need to. Months passed. Eddie's routine remained unchanged, but the atmosphere around him shifted. Marines began lingering after meals, not to socialize, but simply to be near someone who understood service in ways they were still learning. He never gave advice, never shared war stories, never positioned himself as anything more than the cook. But his presence was a kind of teaching, a demonstration of what it meant to serve without recognition, to find purpose in humble work. The base chaplain, Father Mackenzie, began stopping by the kitchen during quiet hours, not for counseling sessions or formal conversations, but simply to share coffee and comfortable silence with someone who seemed to understand the weight of carrying other people's burdens. Mackenzie had served as a Navy chaplain before transferring to the Marines, and he recognized in Eddie the particular exhaustion that came from witnessing too much, carrying too many secrets, shouldering too much responsibility for others' welfare. One evening, after the last Marine had been fed and the kitchen cleaned, Mackenzie found Eddie sitting alone at one of the prep tables, staring at his hands. "Hard day?" the chaplain asked. Eddie didn't look up. "They all are." Mackenzie sat down across from him. "You know, I've been doing this for 15 years, ministering to Marines, trying to help them carry their burdens, but sometimes I meet someone who's carrying so much that I wonder how they manage to stand upright." Eddie finally looked up. His eyes were tired, older than his face suggested. "You learn to spread the weight around, find new ways to serve, new ways to matter." "Is that what this is?" Mackenzie gestured around the kitchen. "A new way to serve?" Eddie was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I used to feed warriors before they went into battle. Now I feed them while they're learning to become warriors. Same mission, different battlefield." It was the most Eddie had ever said about himself, and Mackenzie understood the privilege of hearing it. One night, a young Marine named Thompson approached Eddie after a particularly difficult training day. The kid was struggling, questioning whether he belonged in the Corps, doubting his ability to measure up. His hands were shaking from exhaustion and stress, and there were tears in his eyes that he was trying hard to hide. How do you do it? Thompson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Day after day, same routine, no recognition, no advancement. How do you find meaning in it? Eddie finished loading the last tray into the dishwasher before answering. He could have given a simple response, could have brushed off the question. Instead, he turned to face Thompson directly, recognizing something in the young Marine's desperation that resonated with his own past struggles. You think this is about the food? Eddie asked. Thompson looked confused. Every meal I cook, Eddie continued, every tray I serve, it's one less thing these Marines have to worry about. They can focus on training, on becoming the warriors they need to be, because they know someone's taking care of the basics. That's not small work, son. That's everything. He paused, studying Thompson's face. You want to know how I find meaning? Look around this mess hall tomorrow during chow. Watch the faces of the Marines eating. Some of them are homesick. Some are scared. Some are questioning whether they're strong enough, smart enough, tough enough to make it. But for 30 minutes, while they're eating food I prepared with my own hands, they're not worried about any of that. They're just fed, taken care of, and that matters. Thompson left that night with a different understanding of service, one that had nothing to do with rank or recognition and everything to do with contribution. But more importantly, he'd learned something about finding purpose in the midst of struggle, about how serving others could become a form of healing for your own wounds. As the years passed, Eddie became part of the base's DNA. New Marines would arrive and quickly learn that the cook was different, though they couldn't always articulate why. Veterans would rotate out, but they'd remember the quiet man who fed them with such care and precision. He never sought attention, never shared his story, never asked for anything beyond the opportunity to do his job well. But in his silence, in his dedication, in the way he transformed a thankless task into an act of service, he taught every Marine who passed through that mess hall something profound about what it truly means to serve. The scars on his hands told a story of battles fought in distant places, but his daily actions told a different story, one of a warrior who'd found a new way to serve, a new way to protect and care for those who would follow in his footsteps. Sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear uniforms or carry weapons. Sometimes they wear aprons and carry ladles. Sometimes they serve their country not through grand gestures, but through countless small acts of care, performed with precision and dedication in the early morning hours when no one is watching. Eddie understood something that many never learn. Service isn't about recognition. It's about contribution. It's about finding ways to make the world a little better, one meal at a time, one Marine at a time, one quiet act of dedication at a time. So now I ask you, have you encountered someone like Eddie? Someone whose quiet service spoke louder than any medal or commendation? Someone who found honor in humble work and meaning in thankless tasks? Share their story in the comments below, because here on True Veteran Stories, we honor those whose greatest achievements are often their most invisible ones. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it, subscribe, and help us keep alive the memory of those who serve without seeking glory, who find purpose in caring for others, and who understand that the truest measure of a person isn't what they've done, but what they continue to do when no one is watching. And the next time you're served a meal by someone who seems unremarkable, look a little closer. Look at their hands, their posture, the precision in their movements. You might just be in the presence of a hero who's found a new way to serve.